Disclaimer: the views and opinions expressed in this episode are those of the guests and do not necessarily reflect the official policy or position of USA Global TV and Radio. The content presented is for informational purposes only and is intended to foster open discussion and debate. Viewer discretion is advised. USA Global TV and Radio does not endorse any particular viewpoint and encourages viewers to seek out additional information and perspectives. Saving America with Dr. David D. Schein.
Welcome to USA Global TV and Radio, where our mission is to provide education, entertainment, hope, and inspiration. USA Global TV and Radio connects you with experts and audiences all around the world every single day to help you succeed in business and to live a richer life. Visit us at usaglobaltv.com to learn about career and life-changing training and mentoring programs like the Listening Mentor. Subscribe to our newsletter to stay informed about our special programs and offers. Discover how you can become a guest on one of our shows or a host or producer of a USA Global TV and Radio show of your very own. That's USA Global TV and Radio, where the doctor is always in.
Welcome to Saving America. This is your host, Dr. David D. Schein. As the summer ends, things continue to heat up. While the official end of summer is a few weeks off, everybody knows when school starts and Labor Day passes, it's the effective end of summer. Russia and Ukraine, time to change course. There are plenty of players in the drama regarding the invasion of Ukraine by Russia. The crazed murderer Putin still thinks he will eventually take over Ukraine. Frankly, he thinks he will eventually take over the rest of Europe that used to be part of the USSR. Yes, folks, he's right out there with some of the television and movie villains that we've seen in the past in various James Bond movies, etc. And that's, for some of you too young to remember, USSR was that incredible failed attempt at communism that cost millions of lives and proved that it simply does not work. Due to the systemic failures within Ukraine itself and the parallel failures of the major European countries to modernize their militaries and take on Putin earlier, this has become a tough case to resolve. This, of course, was complicated by the incredible failure of the Biden-Harris administration that allowed the second invasion to happen at all. Further, once started, Biden's handlers were slow-walking aid to Ukraine and would not provide offensive weapons. Of course, I say handlers since we know that by 2022, old Joe was not mentally capable of being president. Most foreign powers, including Putin, obviously knew that. After years of not providing the brave and resilient Ukrainian fighters the weapons they need, the tide is turning. It looks like Putin's failure to now come to the table and instead still slaughtering civilians is changing U.S. strategy. It is very likely that the U.S. will provide Ukraine the offensive weapons needed to start causing damage to Russian infrastructure. Parallel to that, penalizing countries still buying Russian oil should also help. This is parallel to my pleas to stop buying anything from the threat to world civilization, China. Confirmation of this is a report that an $850 million package of weapons, much of it paid for by the EU, is now pending in the U.S. That package includes 3,000 extended-range attack munition missiles with ranges up to 280 miles. Officials said their use will also require Pentagon approval. But that has been the problem all along. Let's give Ukraine the weapons and the go-ahead to use them as they see fit. They've earned that right. Military expert Stephen Bryan, who recently was a guest here on Saving America, has indicated that Ukraine is considering the best at making attack drones. It also makes its own cruise-type missiles. Bryan continues that Russia is number 2 making these type of drones, with the U.S. and China way behind. This has to be a real priority for the future of USA military. Cheap and deadly, we also have to develop capabilities for defending against those drones. Not surprisingly, some of the useless and biased talking heads of the slopstream media have criticized the president's most recent efforts to bring peace between Russia and Ukraine. Vice President Vance has spoken out to defend such efforts as not wasting time. An effort was justified, but since that did not work, tougher steps will need to be followed by the U.S. and its allies. Another positive step is that NATO is not backing down from helping Ukraine. I note the series of ridiculous demands from that murderer Putin. He wants the eastern Donbass region of Ukraine, a very productive area. He wants to make sure Ukraine never joins NATO. He doesn't want any Western troops stationed in Ukraine, and essentially wants Russia to have complete control over Ukraine and its relationship with other countries. No sensible country would agree to these demands. Russia must be punished until all such demands are taken off the table. Sadly, that means more death and destruction, but the world needs to make sure it's happening in Russia now, not just in Ukraine. The world will wait and watch as the next steps unfold. Horror at a Catholic school in Minneapolis. I attended Catholic school K through 8th grade. I now teach at a Catholic university. Any shooting is bad, and a shooting at a school is even worse in our culture. The murdering piece of garbage who did the shooting committed suicide and cannot be examined. As many do, he left a variety of materials such as videos. This event hits me on an emotional level as a parent, grandparent, and a lifelong Catholic. The shooting took place at the church associated with the Annunciation Catholic School in Minneapolis. The students were celebrating Mass on the first day of school. 2 boys, 8 and 10, were dead. 17 others were wounded. The reports are that the shooter stood outside initially and peppered the stained glass windows of the church with as many as 50 rounds. It is my approach to never use the name of a shooter in a case like this. This case actually supports my approach, given that this garbage mentions another mass shooter that he admired on his social media. Reportedly, he targeted this school, which he said in a video, since it was an easy target and would cause a great tragedy. We do know that this young man changed his first name when he was only 17 to a more feminine name and claimed to now be female. Reports identified him as a trans woman. The specific tie to the school is that his mother worked at the school for many years until she retired. There does not seem to be any animosity expressed for the school or its students in his social media. Reports are that 2 of his magazines for his rifle that were found at the scene, one said, "Kill Donald Trump," and another said, "For the children." As usual, this is an act of a true coward. I believe he will rot in hell for eternity. There are no words that will help those parents of the dead and wounded. I am not sure how those children who survived this terror will be able to move forward in their lives without their view of the world forever being clouded. I can only extend my sincere sympathy to the victims and the near victims. I hope we can discourage future shooters by refusing to give their names any form of credit that could be used by other potential shooters. I-9 compliance and ICE raids. In 1986, President Reagan was encouraged to support the Immigration Reform and Control Act, IRCA. Part of the package was enhanced protection against ethnic discrimination, the introduction of the I-9 pre-employment form, and the requirement that employers only employ people here legally, and the big one, the amnesty that granted as many as 3 million people, mostly Hispanic, their citizenship. Reagan reluctantly agreed to this bill with the understanding that there would never be another amnesty like it. Of course, it was a Democrat calm job in many measures. Virtually everyone who has ever been employed in a legitimate job since IRCA passed has been required to sign an I-9 form, and in most cases present a valid driver's license and their social security card. Smart employers make copies of the supporting documentation just in case of an audit. There have been some updates to the I-9 form since different ID verification documents can be used other than the 2 I just mentioned. From time to time, up until about the year 2000, there were routine visits by Federal Wage Hour Division folks where the I-9 forms had to be produced. Starting around the year 2000, audits seemed to have been relaxed, and in turn, compliance in some industries became much less. From time to time, there were industry raids by federal agents, but these were not frequent. The best that I can tell is that the trigger was an employer had a large number of employees where the social security numbers did not match the records that the feds had for that number. During the Biden-Harris years, such enforcement actions were rare, if ever. With the arrival of the second Trump presidency, things have changed dramatically. The highest profile cases have been raids of factories, with one of the most widely reported a meat processing plant, Glen Valley Foods in South Omaha, Nebraska. A reported 63 people were taken into custody by ICE, which stands for Immigration and Customs Enforcement. I highlight the Omaha case since the company defended its hiring practices by explaining that they supported their I-9 compliance by verifying applicants with the federal government's E-Verify program. This is available only to employers to verify the legitimacy of the employee's paperwork, but is often recommended as an extra step for employers that want to be fully in compliance with immigration rules for hiring. The problem is that, as a spokesperson for ICE who was defending the raid said, E-Verify has a lot of flaws. So even if an employer uses it, they still need to carefully monitor and review each person hired. This is just crazy, folks. I sure hope that the feds under the current administration will clean this up, and now employers should be able to rely on the E-Verify system. In the meantime, janitorial services, hotels, clubs, and resorts, meat packing, and large restaurants and restaurant chains should be reviewing all their current employee records for possible issues before a potential ICE raid. For all employers, be sure to use the current I-9 form available online, and importantly, make copies of the ID documents that the new employee produces and keep them with the I-9 form.
All rise.
Many in our audience were not born or certainly not old enough to be aware of the horrors of 9/11. Please describe what happened that day and how it led to your book, Thunderdog. And of course, we already know that at age 14, you got your first guide dog. So how, just as we lead into this question, how long does a guide dog work with an individual? Because I know there's a year or two of training, and then they only go a certain period of time. Is that correct?
Not a certain period of time. It's all about the health of the dog. So my second guide dog, Holland, actually worked 13 years. Now, we weren't doing a lot of walking around for the last few years, but he worked from 1973 until 1986. Wow. And I had arranged to get a third guide dog, and 2 weeks before, he collapsed out in our backyard, and we got him to the vet. The vet said, we can bring him back up, but he's not going to have a good quality of life. He's had a heart attack or a stroke or perhaps both. And so we had to say goodbye to Holland a little bit more suddenly than we had thought. But then 2 weeks later, I went up and got my third guide dog, Klondike, and began working with him. At the World Trade Center in 1999, when we opened the office for Quantum, I had just gotten my fifth guide dog, Roselle. And so Roselle and I went to the World Trade Center, and I spent time, as the leader of the office I was in, I knew that I needed to do what anyone else who was leading an office would do, but I had to do them differently. So for example, not only did I need to know what to do in an emergency and how to function, but I had to actually know it because I'm not going to read signs. And so I spent a lot of time walking around the complex, learning where things were, talking to the Port Authority, police, and fire departments and so on, learning what the emergency evacuation procedures were, and so on. And what I didn't realize until many, many years later is that what I actually had done was developed a mindset that says, you know what to do if there's ever an emergency. You don't need to fear it. And I didn't realize that, but that's part of, I think, what my makeup is. But the bottom line is I learned all of that. And so I was well equipped to deal with running an office. And the other reason that I learned a lot of that was, as a leader of an office, if my salespeople brought in an employee, or excuse me, a guest to talk with us or see our products and then talk about possible proposals and contracts and so on, and during all of that, we decided to go to lunch. How was it going to look if I said, well, I don't know how to get anywhere around the World Trade Center. I'm blind. And 2 hours later, we're going to be back up in the office negotiating multi-million-dollar contracts? That doesn't work. I needed to know where things were so that I could say, what do you want for lunch? Oh, you like deli sandwiches. There's this great restaurant downstairs called Fine and Shapiro, which was good. And I'll take you there and literally lead the way. Now, my employees always, of course, said, well, he can really see, he's just faking it. You know, they teased me a lot, but they knew. And that's why we did some of the things, including those bright employees, the way we did, because they knew that I was going to work to impress the heck out of anybody who came in. Well, so on September 11th, we were going to be holding some seminars teaching some of our reseller partners how to sell our products. And at 8:45, I was in my office along with a colleague, David Frank, who had flown in the night before. David was going to be the person to talk about pricing and pricing models and so on, and help our reseller partners. My job was to be, and David didn't live there, so my job was to be the day-to-day technical contact, having a master's degree in physics, learning all the technical aspects of products. I even helped our sales engineers and service engineers diagnose problems sometimes. But the bottom line is that I knew how to do that and knew how to be technical because that's what my background was. So as I always also told all my salespeople, and it's something that I talk a lot about when I talk about teamwork and traveling the country or the world, speaking today, what I told them was, you know, I hired you because you convinced me that you could sell. I hope that you will. But my job is not to boss you around, but rather to work with you to figure out how I can add value to what you do. And certainly having a technical knowledge that most of them didn't, and being articulate and so on, that helped. And so I worked with salespeople to do all of that. So my job on September 11th was to be the guy doing the basic seminars, running a laptop projector slideshow, using my Braille script so that I knew everything about the slide presentations, including even where things would show up on the screen, because my wife and I created a very detailed script. And so at 8:45, we were getting ready to do the seminars, and the last thing we had to do was to create a list of all the people who would be coming so that we could fax it on letterhead to the Port Authority security people in order that they would know who's coming, so that when somebody came to the security desk, they could say, I'm supposed to go up to the 78th floor to Quantum, and the security people could say, what's your name, and check them off the list because it was on letterhead, and they were allowed to go up rather than having to call us every time one of the 50 people scheduled that day would be coming. So at 8:45, I was literally reaching for letterhead when suddenly the building sort of shuddered and shook. We heard a muffled kind of thud, and then it began to tip in one direction, as I'm now tipping my hand toward the camera. Literally, it tipped, I think, like 20 feet. Tall buildings like that are flexible. They're made to bend in the breeze because heavy windstorms and so on could shake buildings. And in fact, an airplane hit the Empire State Building during the 1940s, a military aircraft that got lost in a fog bank. So tall buildings are made to flex, and that's what happened when the airplane hit the building. Everybody says, of course, you didn't know what went on because you couldn't see it. And as I point out, the last time I checked, Superman and X-ray vision are fiction. The building was struck on the north side of its faces at about the 96th floor, technically between floors 93 and 99. We were on the 78th floor on the south side. Excuse me, no one knew what happened. And all the way down the stairs, with the hundreds of people that I interacted with, no one knew what happened because all of our people were on the other side of the building from where the plane hit. Anyway, David and I actually finally said goodbye to each other because we thought we were about to take a 78th floor plunge to the street when the building stopped and it started coming back the other way.
Wow.
And when it got vertical again, I went back into my office. I was standing in the doorway. I grew up on the San Andreas Fault in California, right? Building moves, go stand in doorway. Yeah, a lot of good that does on the 78th floor and you're standing by a non-bearing wall, but you know, it's habit. Anyway, so the bottom line is that after the building stopped moving, I went back in and I met Roselle coming out from under my desk. I told her to heel, which meant to come around on my left side and sit, which she did. And about that time, the building dropped straight down about 6 feet. The reason it dropped is because the expansion joints that make the building flexible went back to their normal configuration, which is exactly what was supposed to happen. Then David looked out the windows and started seeing fire and smoke above us, and I could hear noises outside the window, and he described it as millions of pieces of burning paper falling outside our windows. And he kept saying, we got to get out of here. We can't stay here. We got to get out of here right now. Remember I mentioned that mindset before? It
Yes.
must have clicked in, because what I started to say to David was, slow down, we'll get out. No, we got to get out of here right now. We can't stay here. The building's on fire. We had early arrivals, early guests, and they started screaming and moving toward the exit, but then they heard me say, slow down, stop. And they waited to see what was going to happen. And finally, David used what I call the big line. You don't understand. You can't see it. That's what people do. The presumption is if you can't see it, you don't know. And the reality is when you can see it, you don't know. The fact is that David wasn't seeing what I was seeing because he was panicking. What David wasn't seeing was that I had a dog sitting next to me, wagging her tail, yawning, going, who woke me up, not giving any indication of fear. And I knew what Roselle was like when she was afraid, because she's afraid of thunderstorms. Well, I finally got David to focus, and I said, get our guests to the stairs. Do not let them take elevators, because you saw fire. And if that elevator, if those fires are in the at all central part of the building, it's where the elevators are, and people are going to perish. So don't let them.
Absolutely.
Don't let them take the elevators. They got to take the stairs. Well, he got them to the stairs. And meanwhile, I called my wife, Karen. The media hadn't gotten the story yet by any stretch of the imagination. She wanted to know more. And I said, all I know is we must have had some sort of a muffled explosion or something. We don't know more. And when I know more, I'll let you know. But we're leaving the building now. David came back. We swept the offices. We went to the stairs and we started down. And I won't spend a lot of time telling the entire story, because I know you've only got a limited amount of time to do this. But the bottom line is, as soon as we got into the stairwell, I began smelling an odor. And it took me about four floors to realize that what I was smelling were the fumes from burning jet fumes.
Yes.
And burning jet fuel. And I realized that it took me about 4 floors to recognize it, but I realized I'm smelling what I smell at airports. And so I observed to other people around me, that odor is the fumes from burning jet fuel. And they said, yeah, we were trying to figure it out. That's what it is. We must have been hit by an airplane. But that's all we knew. All the way down the stairs, that's all we knew.
And Michael, how many minutes does it, and I'm assuming that this stairwell was totally bumper to bumper with people, butt to butt, as we say. So how many minutes do you estimate it took from when you entered the stairwell on the 78th floor to get to ground level? About how long was that?
Not estimation, actual fact. We got to the stairs about 9:50 or 8:50 because I checked my watch. We started down, and at the 30th floor, we met firefighters coming up the stairs. And by then, and I checked my watch again, it was 10 after 9. So it took us 20 minutes to get from floor 78 to floor 30. But then with firefighters coming up and taking a lot of the stairwell, that slowed us down. And it took from 9:10 until 9:35 to get down the other 30 floors. So now that's a total of 45 minutes. And then when we got down to the bottom and got out into the lobby, they wouldn't let anyone go outside through the doors that would go from the lobby to outside, probably because if you had gone outside there, that's where people were jumping from up above, and they didn't want that to be an issue. So people were escorted or shunted through the whole complex to go outside as far away from the Twin Towers as we could be. So we didn't get outside until 9:45. So it was basically almost an hour from the time the plane was hit until we got outside. Once we got outside, David looked around and he said, Mike, there's fire in Tower 2. And I went, what are you talking about? He said, there's fire. We didn't know. The fact is that
plane had hit.
The fact of the matter is we didn't feel it. We didn't hear it. We were in our own little cocoon, if you will, our own little cave going down. All we knew was when we got outside, we were told to leave the area. So we went over to Broadway and started walking north on Broadway. We were on the west side of the street. So to my right was Broadway and to my left was a building. We crossed several streets. We got to Vesey Street and David said, I can see the fire really clear. We're close to Tower 2. I want to take some pictures, because he saw the fire in Tower 2 that we had no idea about. Yes. We thought maybe the fire just dumped across from our building because we had no clue. David took out his camera and was taking pictures. I tried to call my wife, Karen. I couldn't get through. The circuits were busy.
Right.
Because clearly people was saying goodbye to their loved ones.
Yes.
And so I had just put my phone away, and David was putting his camera away when a police officer yelled, "Get out of here, it's coming down now." We heard this rumble that became this deafening roar. I described the sound as kind of a combination of a freight train and a waterfall. You could hear metal clattering and clashing and glass breaking and so on, and then the white noise of Tower 2, which was about 100 yards away from us, collapsing. Everyone turned and ran. David turned and ran. He was gone. I turned Roselle 180 degrees and started running back the way we came. And we got to the next street now going back. So that was Fulton Street that we had crossed a little while before. And I turned right on Fulton Street because there was debris falling around us, and I was hoping I could get out of some of the line of fire from that debris. And it helped a little. I ran about 25 yards and suddenly caught up to David because it turns out that that's the way he had run. And when I caught up to David, he apologized. And I said, "Don't worry about it. Let's keep going." And we ran, and we suddenly were engulfed in all the dust and the dirt and debris from Tower 2's collapse. And we knew we had to get out of it. So now to my right was the building because we were going the other way. And I told Roselle, "Go right, right." I don't know whether she could hear me or see my hand signals, but she must have known what I want, because suddenly I heard an opening on the right, and she turned to right to go into that opening, took one step and stopped and wouldn't move. She froze. And I'm going, "Come on, Roselle." Nope, she wouldn't move. And I realized she stopped for a reason. She's a guide dog. So
Yes.
upon investigation, I realized that we were at the top of a flight of stairs. She did exactly what she was supposed to do. She got a hug for it, and then I said forward, which is the right command, and we went down the stairs and ended up in the arcade entrance to the Fulton Street subway station. We were there with some other people, and an employee of the subway system, a guy named Lou, came and got us and took us all. He discovered us there and took us to an employee locker room. There were already a few other people there, and we just sat there and tried to make sense of it all. And we were there about 15 minutes when a police officer came and said, "The air is clear up above. You can't stay here. You need to leave." And he wouldn't wait for discussion. He turned, and we just followed him back to the stairs, up the stairs, through the arcade that I mentioned earlier, and then up the last 2 flights of stairs. And we got outside, and David looked around and he said, "Oh my God, Mike, there's no Tower 2 anymore." And I said, "What do you see?" And he said, "All I see are pillars of smoke, hundreds of feet tall. There's no Tower 2. It's gone." And we stood there kind of in shock, not understanding. And then we just continued to walk on Fulton Street. We were walking west on Fulton, and we walked about 10 minutes, and then we were in this little plaza area when we heard that freight train waterfall sound again, and we knew that it must be our tower collapsing. And David looked back and he said, "There's another dust cloud coming." There was a little retaining wall there, so we got behind it and ducked down, and we waited till everything passed and the sound subsided. We stood up, and David looked around and he said, "Oh my God, Mike, there's no World Trade Center anymore." And I said again, "What do you see?" And he said, "All I see are fingers of fire and flame hundreds of feet tall and pillars of smoke. It's gone." And to think we had gone in 3 hours before just to do our jobs, and in the blink of an eye, literally, it was all gone. We stood there a couple minutes, and then I tried to call my wife, Karen, and this time I got through to her, and she's the first one who told us how 2 aircraft had been deliberately hijacked and crashed into the towers, a third to the Pentagon, and a fourth was still missing over Pennsylvania. And that's when we knew what happened. I do want to say one other thing. I want to talk about David for a moment. As we were going down the stairs, when we got to about the 50th floor, suddenly David said, "Mike, we're going to die. We're not going to make it out of here." And I just yelled at David, "Stop it, David. If Roselle and I can go down these stairs, so can you." And he told me later that brought him out of the funk that he was going into. And what he wanted to do, he said, was to walk a floor below me and shout up to me what he saw. And he wanted to do that because he wanted to get his mind off of what was going on and off of his imagination. So he wanted something to do. So I said, "Okay, go ahead." So he started doing that. You know, when I got to the 49th floor, he said, "Hey, Mike, I'm at the 48th floor, going on down." Walked down a few more floors. I was on 45, and he said, "Hey, Mike, I'm at the 44th floor. This is where the Port Authority cafeteria is. Not stopping, going on down." And why do I mention that? Because in reality, we all stayed pretty calm going down the stairs. And I think that David shouting up to me was important, not for me necessarily, because I've got to go down the stairs anyway. But what David did was, in his shouting of 42nd floor, all's okay, anyone within the sound of his voice knew that there was someone above them or below them who was okay on the stairs. His actions had to help keep lots of people focused going down the stairs, and that doesn't get talked about much. So I like to bring that up because I know that what he did helped a great deal, whether anyone recognizes it or even remembers it or not. But eventually, as I said, we talked to Karen, and then we started moving up toward Midtown Manhattan. And later that afternoon, I learned the trains were running and went with David to the Penn Station train station and caught a train out to New Jersey. David left me there and walked up to the Upper East Side. He wanted to stay with his sister, and so that was where he was staying anyway. So I went to New Jersey, and he did that. And I called my wife and told her a friend of ours, Tom Painter, who had been a friend of Karen since high school out in California, was also living in New Jersey. And as soon as he heard that something happened, he just came down to our house, not knowing whether I was working from home that day or in the office or what. He drove Karen to the train station, and they picked me up, and we went home. And so it was kind of over. And as soon as we got home, I took Roselle's harness off. I wanted to take her outside. She would have none of it. She just ran off and grabbed her favorite tug bone and started playing tug of war with my retired guide dog, Linny, because it was over for her. It was all done. She was fine. Nothing threatened her. And so she wanted to play. Dogs don't do what if. And in my new book, Live Like a Guide Dog, that's one of the things that we talk about. We focus so much as humans on trying to control everything or worrying about controlling everything that we don't recognize there's only a very limited amount of stuff that we have control over. And if we would stop trying to worry about and control every little thing, especially all the stuff we don't have influence over, we would be a lot less fearful, we would be a lot more open to trust, and we would live much better lives.
Please proceed.
The tariff trail expands. Most Americans know that a number of countries have been targeted by the Trump administration tariff campaign. Auto, steel, pharmaceuticals, and some IT materials have been especially targeted separately from these specific countries. The latest target is furniture. Trump resorted to his Truth Social platform to announce this investigation. He reported that his goal is to bring furniture manufacturing back to the United States. He mentioned the states that might gain from this push as North Carolina, South Carolina, and Michigan. U.S. furniture manufacturing has been in decline, best I can tell, so this may make sense. Also added to tariff enforcement list are wind turbines. Trump has actively spoken out against them as unreliable for electric supply and dangerous to birds. Seeking Chapter 11 bankruptcy protection after doing so just over 5 years ago is Bravo Bio Restaurants LLC, which also owns 25 Brio Italian restaurants and 23 Bavo Italian restaurants. When announcing their filing, the restaurant group indicated that it was a tough time for all in the restaurant industry, and I know that to be a fact. Here in Houston, where the economy is strong, I do see restaurants closing on a regular basis. It has to be worse in other parts of the country where the economy is not as good. A lot of this is the hangover from the Biden-Harris inflation surge on top of a weak recovery from the shutdowns during COVID. Costs are up, finding employees is more difficult, and many families are simply struggling, and they're not eating out as much or bargain hunting and not spending as much money when they do dine out. Democrat corruption in Florida reported. I came across an interesting article by Andrew Kerr in the Washington Free Beacon with the long title, How a Florida Congresswoman and Her Family Allegedly Siphoned Millions from Taxpayers to Fund Her Campaign. We do not have time to dive into all the details of this fascinating article, but if you have an interest, you may want to check out the article itself. The basics are that Representative Sheila Sherflus McCormick, a Democrat from Florida, ran for Alcee Hastings' seat a number of times. She never got close, but when the controversial Democrat died in 2021, she got her chance. She won a primary election by just 5 votes. Somehow she was able to put $2.6 million of her own money into the campaign, despite having reportedly earned only $86,000 in the prior year. The tie-in, however, is that she was the CEO of Trinity Healthcare Services. According to the article sources, that company billed Florida for 17 invoices that brought the firm $5.8 million in taxpayer funds. Later, Florida's Department of Emergency Management sued, claiming that the payments were not legit. The money was not paid back, but the company paid $6.2 million in profit-sharing fees to Sheriff McCormick. She then reportedly put millions into her campaign coffers for the two campaigns in 2021 and 2022. The article noted additional concerns about her other business dealings. Sheriff McCormick did speak with the Free Beacon and claimed all billing issues had been resolved, though some type of compromise agreement. However, the article went on to describe a series of possible business transactions and campaign finance issues. Not surprisingly, the House Ethics Committee is going to investigate the situation. Naturally, suspicions and accusations do not mean that any of this will be proven to be legally wrong, but I do hope the taxpayers will start getting some real answers. Only a handful of people in each state get to serve in the U.S. Congress. Hopefully, they are committed to their constituents in the United States, not to padding their own pockets. Well, just when you thought it was safe to go back in the water, the Food and Drug Administration has issued an alert recalling frozen shrimp that were brought in from Indonesia by a company called Southwind Foods, LLC. The possible contamination is the radioactive substance cesium-137. The company reports the bagged frozen shrimp product was distributed between July 17th and August 8th, 2025 to retailers, distributors, and wholesalers in the following states: Alabama, Arizona, California, Massachusetts, Minnesota, Pennsylvania, Utah, Virginia, and Washington. Brands involved include Sandbar, Arctic Shores, Best Yet, Great American, First Street. And some of these are available from various retailers, including Walmart.
Sustained.
Business students, business persons, or consumers, business law impacts much of what you do. This segment is designed to help you get past the headlines on key stories. Another non-delegation case, this one over FINRA. Business law is inextricably involved with government regulations, so activities of many agencies directly impact businesses. FINRA's website explains that the acronym stands for the Financial Industry Regulatory Authority. It is a not-for-profit, self-regulating agency that oversees U.S. broker-dealers. It tries to ensure that everyone can participate in the market with confidence by ensuring that investors are protected, financial advisors are licensed, and the interactions are truthful. In a recent ruling, the D.C. Court of Appeals decided that at least some of the authority wielded by FINRA without adequate federal oversight violates the private non-delegation doctrine. The case is Alpine Securities Corporation versus FINRA. In 2022, FINRA sanctioned Alpine for violating FINRA's rules and issued a cease and desist order against Alpine. Alpine then sued in federal court, challenging FINRA's constitutionality. Then, while the first case was pending, FINRA decided that Alpine had violated the cease and desist order and initiated an expedited proceeding to expel Alpine from membership in FINRA. Alpine then sought a preliminary injunction from the district court against the expedited proceeding, arguing that FINRA is unconstitutional because its expedited action against Alpine violated either the private non-delegation doctrine or the appointments clause. The district court denied the preliminary injunction. To stay in business, Alpine appealed to the D.C. Circuit. The appeals court reversed the district court because Alpine had been tossed out of FINRA with no opportunity for review by the Securities and Exchange Commission, SEC. Therefore, Alpine was entitled to a limited preliminary injunction because it has demonstrated that it faces irreparable harm if expelled from FINRA. Further, Alpine demonstrated likelihood of success on its argument that the lack of government review prior to expulsion violated the private non-delegation doctrine. It would seem that Alpine is in the lead position on this interesting case.
How does the defendant plead?
Possible removal of federal funds for NPR and PBS. In the interest of full disclosure, I got an important start in my adult life on nonprofit radio. I began with a show on arts and entertainment in Philadelphia early in my college life. The show was on Penn, University of Pennsylvania's FM station, which had a strong following. After about a year, the public radio station, WHYY-FM, asked me to move my show to their station, and I closed it out about 2 years later. It was a 1-hour radio program with arts and theater reviews and interviews with many interesting people in the arts. As a result, I began an arts management business, which I ran for about 2.5 years while in college. 30 years later, I had another 1-hour program, this time daily and on a regular AM station in Richmond, Virginia. That show covered employment matters. Since that time, I've been a guest on 2 different nonprofit radio and TV stations here in Houston. One is the PBS affiliate. So some may ask, how can I advocate to defund NPR and PBS? Well, it is because if they had kept the damn operation nonpartisan, I doubt any of us would have a complaint. However, it's turned into an extreme left operation that should not be for publicly funded operations. Further, the stations incessantly run fundraising campaigns, and the stations now include commercials, so they are capable of funding themselves. This is critical in a time of enormous national debt. Even a left-winger like Bill Maher has come out in favor of defunding NPR and PBS, and I do not expect Sesame Street and other popular programming to go away. Given their popularity, I'm sure there will be so-called sponsors, not advertisers.
Please raise your right hand.
Our series of interviews for Saving America establishes that the world is full of interesting people. Once you hear from our next guest, I'm sure that you'll agree that he deserves the moniker of an interesting person. Saving America welcomes Eric M. Walwent, and who, after losing 3 jobs, bought his first rental property with the last of his money. In the next 2 years, he and his wife rehabbed, rented, and refinanced 20 units to become financially free by the time he was only 30. Since then, they have rehabbed and repositioned over 1,000 more units. They have consolidated their various coaching and other activities under Clear Sky Training Limited. He and his family have 4 best-selling books and own and operate multiple businesses. They do this and still spend half their time traveling and speaking all over the world. Using what he teaches, both of his kids started buying real estate when they were 7 years old without their parents' money or credit. Eric and his family host the Real Power Family radio program, which is on the Brushwood Media Network. Their most recent book is Family Success Triangle, Be, Do, Have. We had to shorten this bio so we'd have time for the interview itself. We welcome Eric M. Walwent for his first appearance on Saving America.
Thank you so much, Dr. Schein. It is a pleasure to be here.
And it's a pleasure to have you over here. As you know, we ask our guests 3 questions. So the first one is, so many people face tough challenges like losing 3 jobs in a row, and then they just give up. What made you different? Why? And also, why real estate versus some other form of business?
When I graduated at 17, did a year of college, and then joined the Army so I could pay for college. It was always beat into me that you have to do this. And we didn't look at the ROI of actually getting a degree. I just blindly went where my parents had taught me my whole life to go. After that, I realized, man, this is hard. I got to pay for this. I can't even get enough loans, and I'm working 3 jobs. I never considered giving up. So I joined the Army, did 4 years active duty, ended up 13 years total. And in that time frame, I was a platoon sergeant. I was a medic in the Army. I was treating people. I had 40 guys working for me. I had 12 ambulance squads that were running 24 hours a day. And the bottom line is, as a platoon sergeant, if I made bad decisions, people could die. As a medic, if I made bad decisions, people could die. So you ask, how did I go and not give up? I never considered giving up. It didn't matter what happened. Most of my adult life at that point in time, if I made a bad decision or if I just gave up, people would die. And so I just never gave up. I don't know how to give up. Even today, I can't imagine walking away and giving up from something.
Well, it's pretty fascinating. But the second part of my question is, why real estate once you got into your own business versus something else?
That is not a simple question. I knew how to work with my hands. I read Rich Dad, Poor Dad.
Yes.
Right before I lost my last job, I decided to buy my first rental property. And about the same time as I got fired, I got it rented. So I finally got my first check, and definitely not two before I lost that job. But it wasn't enough to make the payment on having another vacant house. I couldn't even make the payment on my own house. And, I'm counting on people paying rent, and my wife is making $8.50 an hour. So there's no way we're living off of that. And I just decided, you know what? If we're going to do this, I've lost 3 jobs in 2 years, and each one I immediately came back. I got a better job paying me twice as much money, give or take, within a few weeks of losing the one before that. And I just decided I'm done. I'm not going to get another job ever. I am going to start my own business. It is going to be, involve real estate. And I would just like to buy houses, fix them up, and rent them out. And that has evolved into 18 different businesses, including multiple holding companies, a construction company, a real estate brokerage, a little bit of lending, and a bunch of training companies, multiple books, a radio show. But it all stems from that first decision of trying to create a better life for my family. And I just happen to choose real estate as the vehicle to do it.
Well, that's a fantastic story, and I'm sure it'll inspire our audience. And our second question is, your current book is Family Success Triangle, Be, Do, Have. Share with our audience how this book will help them with raising their children, which I thought was kind of an interesting approach.
As I said, as a sergeant in the Army, I had plenty of people working for me, and I took care of them. Frequently, they were older than me. I got promoted very rapidly. And yet, it's kind of like raising kids or taking care of, protecting your children. You want to push them. You have to get the job done. And at the same time, you want to put them in as little harm as possible or in the way. And that's not always easy in the jobs that we did. I mean, I was an airborne sapper, jumped out of airplanes, blew stuff up. So not everything is, quote, safe. You're not ever secure. And here I go on a tangent. I always do this. Could you tell me the question again?
Sure. And we want you to talk about your current book because
the book. Yeah, sorry
about how
that
fits in with raising kids, which I thought was an interesting approach. Okay.
After leading troops in the Army and then starting businesses and hiring people, I looked after these people the same way I did in the Army. And then I finally had children last. And there's very little difference. If you can be a good leader, you can be a good father. And I know my kids will probably say I'm a little bit too militant, a little bit too much of a drill sergeant, and that may be. And they get incredibly good results. I mean, they're right now, as we record this, they're recording their own radio show that'll go out to millions of people without any adults. It's just the 2 teenagers talking. So
Excellent.
I have instilled good values in them. And the most important of those values, I wrote my perception of what that should be in my book, Family Success Triangle. And then the second half of the chapter, my wife wrote her perception of what it should be. And you can see sometimes we're completely aligned and sometimes we're way off base. We come in wildly different, but we all have the same basic morals and ethics. And that's what we taught our children. That's what I put into my book. And it really doesn't matter if you're running a business, if you have trouble with employees, or if you're a sergeant in the Army, or just a father or a mother. The same basic principles can guide you through everything. That's why I wrote the book, Family Success Triangle.
Sounds great. And speaking of radio shows, our third question is, you've got your whole family doing a program on Brushwood called Real Power Family Radio Show. Tell us a little bit about that show and what are you trying to do for your audience?
I'm trying to make their world a better place. Every single day we end with use what you learned here today to make the world a better place. From the time my first son, Devin, was born, I think the first couple of weeks of his life, I told him, I want you to go out and change the world. And then I realized there's very bad people in the world that change it for the worse. So I changed what I was saying because I think words have power. They're very important to use exactly the right word. That is the problem with the governments and the media today. They're changing the definitions of words. So when I say something, I am very specific. And I told Devin, go out. I want you to go to sleep. I love you. And I want you to dream about making the world a better place. And I have said that to him for 17 and a half years of his life. And the 14 or 15-year-old, at least in a couple of weeks, he'll be 15. I've said it every night of his life. I love you. I want you to go to sleep and dream about making the world a better place. That is what I want to do, not just for our family, not just for my city or state or even the America. I want to give the information that people need to make the world better. I want them to step back and see and not be controlled by emotions and especially not fear. I want them to form a good, hopefully a family unit, or you get your tribe together, whatever that tribe, whatever that group is, and you help each other, and that will make everybody's world better. And when you get good at that, and you have a nice strong family or a strong group of people, then take it to the next level and help the next level to get bigger. And I find that writing books and having my own radio show is the best way to do these things and reach the most amount of people.
Well, that's fascinating. Of course, it makes you a perfect interview for Saving America, because part of our objective is to make America better. And I think if we make America better, that will help to make the world better. How can our audience get more information about you, your family, and your various activities? Where's the best places to look?
I am the father of the Real Power Family. You can type Real Power Family anywhere. We're on the Brushwood Media Network. We're on YouTube. I think we're on TikTok, Facebook. If you type it in, my name, Eric M. Woolman, on LinkedIn, I'm there. And we all have our own X accounts and LinkedIn accounts. But just Real Power Family. It's always about the family. It's not just me. It's not just my wife. It is about the group working together that makes us all stronger.
Fantastic. Well, this has been a lot of fun. Eric M. Woolman,
The defense rests, Your Honor.
clown editor from The Atlantic, accidentally on a text stream of Trump administration security folks. Unless you're living under a rock, I'm sure you've heard one of the 20 versions of this story. Recently, one of the first confabs of the whole Trump security crew plus VP Vance were on a text on Signal. The discussion involved getting ready to do something that the world has needed for years, to bomb the Houthi terrorists in Yemen into history. Somehow, Jeffrey Goldberg, editor of the fading magazine The Atlantic, got looped into the text stream. He made a big deal out of how it was horrible that someone without security clearance was somehow able to get into the text stream. I do not disagree with that simple point. I do note that I was introduced to The Atlantic in high school as a literary magazine. My regular audience will not be surprised that I was advanced English in high school. I also introduced to the New Yorker as a similar magazine. Well, that was a long time ago. Today, both are regarded as mere woke trash, having sold out long ago. Given the Dems have nothing but complaints, nothing positive, the Dem liars and fools show in D.C. went into hyperdrive. And as luck would have it, security updates were scheduled before Congress at this time. So Signalgate was born. There have been calls by the Dems for the resignation of Mike Waltz as the national security advisor. Trump intelligently said Waltz learned his lesson and let's move on. That is the correct answer. Lost in all this talking is the bombing of the Houthis, which was the subject of the test, was very successful. And I think this was the third or fourth consecutive night that they were leveling that part of Yemen to get rid of this scourge of the earth. Now, the security team that was on that call said there were no confidential details discussed before Goldberg. I take their word for that, but I would say that there was more discussed than I would like to have exposed to someone like Goldberg. Certainly, given Trump's public announcement of the planned bombing and other recent bombing runs, nothing stunning was discussed here. Goldberg, of course, didn't like being spanked, so he has exaggerated the level of detail he is privy to. I note that I'm unable to read specifically what he wrote since it's behind a paywall, and I surely won't give a penny to The Atlantic. As I've already said in prior webcasts, the Trump team is a credit to the United States. The worst person in his new administration leadership team is far better than the best member of the Biden-Harris administration. So no, I do not consider that the sky is falling. While unhappy, I am more unhappy with the ridiculous time-wasting show that has been brought about by the Dems. What nobody has said so far, why would the phone number of this clown Goldberg have been available to the security team to even invite him to this chat? I cannot imagine why his number was anywhere around. In fact, I believe this sounds like the famous leak from 2 years ago of the abortion decision at the Supreme Court. I want to know how Goldberg's phone number was even in the system. That should be the real question here. Here's my analysis on punishment. Hillary Clinton had a reported 65,000 emails sent from her home computer server. This was a massive and deliberate security violation. If you will imprison her for the rest of her life without parole, I will let you smack Mike Waltz's hand for an error during his first couple weeks on the job.
Silence in the court.
Race-based policy goes to SCOTUS. The Voting Rights Act of 1965 was passed to protect the rights of minority voters throughout the states. It was originally targeted at the vestiges of the Jim Crow laws in the Democrat-controlled South. It also banned the poll tax, another tool the Dems used to keep blacks from voting. However, not everything has been smooth. In an effort to provide more representation for minorities, states have gerrymandered many congressional districts to create black districts. These attempts have repeatedly been brought before the courts. In fact, I have a personal friend who was an expert who testified in such cases over the years. About 20 years ago, this backfired in the Houston area when a so-called black district was won by a white Democrat, not a black one. Currently, there is a battle brewing at the effort to create a second predominantly black district in Louisiana. That state is approximately 30% African American. Unbelievably, this is now before SCOTUS for the third time, this time to see if the creation of the second black district violated the Constitution's Equal Protection Clause for non-black voters. Given that this is overtly race-based, does it now violate the concept of equal protection? Given the diversity of modern society and the growth of minority representation in the Republican Party, it is time to stop showing this specific form of race preference. The Roberts Supreme Court has tended toward a balance with favoring elimination of affirmative action, but less aggressive on targeted voting districts. So right now, this looks like a toss-up.
Order in the court.
Trump has been riding a wave of good business news. It is estimated that on the table are promises to invest over $1 trillion in the USA in the near term. On top of Apple with $500 billion, there are a couple of recent announcements, including Honda indicating that its new Civic will be built in the USA instead of Mexico.
This session is adjourned.
Thanks for joining me for Saving America. If you have questions or comments, please find me on various social media sites. I'm Dr. David D. Schein, and I will see you next week.
Welcome to USA Global TV and Radio, where our mission is to provide education, entertainment, hope, and inspiration. USA Global TV and Radio connects you with experts and audiences all around the world every single day to help you succeed in business and to live a richer life. Visit us at usaglobaltv.com to learn about career and life-changing training and mentoring programs like the Listening Mentor. Subscribe to our newsletter to stay informed about our special programs and offers. Discover how you can become a guest on one of our shows or a host or producer of a USA Global TV and Radio show of your very own. That's USA Global TV and Radio, where the doctor is always in.